It's an interesting question because there are many answers. There is just not one definition, at least at present, for impact investing. There is probably not even one definition for sustainable investing or sustainable finance, the sphere that I'm closely aligned and assigned with. What there is an opportunity and a challenge to manage this plurality and the diversity of different concepts out there currently in the space, because social impact is all about lenses, and it's about a just transition. We're going into that a bit later on, across the spectrum of capital. And the work I've been doing over the course of last year with the UK government task force on social impact investing in the subgroup Better Reporting was to look at the full spectrum of different approaches towards investing, from a very traditional approach, which is actually finance first, to a philanthropic approach, which is impact first, and to look at the grey zones, the 50 shades of grey in between, which are the other outstanding areas of responsible investing, sustainable investing, and impact investing. And what we also did was we looked at how these different approaches align with underlying themes, with inputs and outputs. So that's, for instance, inputs, standards, principles, instructions, metrics, or tools. When you look at outputs, that's actually the different type of management information required, the investor or index reporting, the different type of channels used for information, and of course the public reports out there in the public domain by companies as well as by investors. And it's all about the approaches in the context of compliance. Are we talking about frameworks here? Are we talking about alignment? What does that mean when we look at mandatory versus voluntary frameworks, or normative frameworks, regulatory frameworks? A lot of them have been developed in the space over the last 5 years or so. Very happy to dive into that as well in a moment of time. But a lot of work is still to be done in order to bring further alignment and collaboration and ultimately product innovation. Last but not least, it's all about the targets as well and the target practitioners. So it's actually about the approaches, the alignment with sectors, with a wider investment chain, with the sizes of entities and investors involved, and their expectations to meet specific values or goals.
Thank you very much, Martina. So we can say that impact investing is about generating an environmental and or social return in addition to a financial return. And I remember your spectrum, which is on the left side, you have competitive financial returns in addition to environmental or social returns. And on the right side, you have the compromised financial returns with a priority for the social or environmental returns. And then that's where your 50 shades of grey come in, right? There's that spectrum in between. And depending on, and that's what we want to explore today, is where is Islamic impact investing on that spectrum?
So one of the first projects we looked at is international zakat financing from a state in Malaysia that had an excess of zakat collection to providing drought assistance in Kenya. We were able, with $1.1 million, we were able to impact 1.4 million lives through rehabilitation of borewells and farming. That yielded an impact of $20 million for the community. This was further paid back. The 1.1 million was 500,000 of this was paid back, which was then repurposed for the next neighboring community, which was a great example of demonstrating that Islamic financing or Islamic philanthropy can go beyond just charitable giving, but actually provide sustained impact for the communities many years to come.
For me, it's a phenomenal time to be in this space. Around 10 years ago, I remember I used to, Martina was the head of indices at S&P. And I would often be sitting in the audience and just admiring the incredible work she was doing within the ESG space. But I think it's to be fair to say, Martina, that a lot of us, you know, they kind of thought we were just tree-hugging people. Whereas now, it's actually the chairmans that are coming to people like Martina. You know, this central bank alliance that's come together, 40 central banks around the world are now sort of looking at their climate change policies. And they're all panicking. Even in the, you know, I get emails, I'm now advising the central bank of this, and we don't know what we're doing. Do you know anyone in ESG that we can speak in a gentle way? We can change the world, and it's happening. Now I want to talk about two people that are the driving force of this change. Just like Sudan, it was the women and it was the youth that brought about the revolution. We're seeing this within the Islamic finance, within the SRI, within all these spaces. And what's so interesting for me, my background was a banker, and like anyone that's worked in the banking industry, it wasn't that romantic idea that I thought it would be when I joined Merrill Lynch. It wasn't about, you know, changing the world or making an impact, but you know what, I kind of understood the problems and the issues that we were facing as a financial industry. So there I started getting involved in a lot of initiatives to kind of, I guess, highlight Islamic finance and other, you know, alternatives to the model that we had. And I can see Umar Sheikh in the room. He, you know, from the start, these people have really helped my career, and they've really helped me to kind of bring, you know, this kind of space to the agenda of a lot of very senior people. On the back of a diversity forum called the Internet Multicultural Network, we organised an event, again, with a lot from Umar and other people's help, where we managed to get Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, some of the top 10 investment banks in a room. It was a part of a forum that was part of the Internet Multicultural Network. And we organised just a lunch, you know, evening event, What is Islamic Finance? We had Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi, one of the world's greatest scholars that flew in from Bahrain. We had Iqbal Khan, who, you know, is easily one of the founders of the industry. And that event in itself, we had 600 bankers that came from these organisations. Now, within a week, I was offered to head up the Islamic Finance Wealth Management platform at Merrill Lynch. That, again, gave me incredible, I mean, I was now living my passion, my dream. But from there, I think I kind of came to a place where I wanted to do more. So I left Merrill Lynch, I set up my own consultancy firm, and then I realized that women, you know, it's even if you look at some of the studies that have been done, even in impact investing, you know, it's women that have been long in the game before the guys turned up. And it was, I think, Martina, you'd agree, I think Fidelity last week, they actually had a report, I think 30% of, it was women that are kind of leading the impact investing space. And so, I would often go to these rooms and I would meet women that were actually there. They wanted to, you know, come to the Islamic finance industry because they wanted to actually make a change. And so, but there was very few of us. So what I did, one day I went to an event, there was 300 men and 3 women, so us 3 women got together. We set up a forum called the Women in Islamic Finance. We didn't really know what the objectives or what we were trying to do at that point. But over the years, it's just become more clearer and clearer. We started off with 30 members. Today we have 8,000 globally. Our first event was, we launched at KPMG, and Sheikh Nizam flew in, and I really wanted to highlight the female contribution of our own Muslim world. So the keynote address was on Hazrat Khadija al-Kubra's contributions to business, trade and Islamic finance. And to me, I don't know, I know we have scholars in the room, but I don't know if I'm saying something controversial, but was she not the founder of this industry? Because we know that some of the contracts that we're doing today can go back, right? to what she was doing. But me, being a banker, often I would sometimes, you know, sort of be told, well, you shouldn't really be in the room at the beginning. Now I think, you know, we have more visibility of women and we're seeing amazing kind of things happening.
The work that we do at Ogilvy is really thinking about people, and actually it's quite easy to forget that the end goal of the finance that we have and the structures and the instruments we use is actually about people's lives, whether that's as investors, whether that's as people using financial products, or whether it's people who are beneficiaries of the kind of investments and the impact that we want to create. So we are very interested in what does it mean to be a Muslim investor, a Muslim consumer of products, or a Muslim beneficiary. And a lot of the work we do is to try and understand what attitudes are towards Islamic finance. And sadly, I have a much less rosy view than Samina about the way that young Muslims and Muslim women feel about Islamic finance. And a lot of this is drawn from the study that we were really privileged to work on with Gatehouse Bank. I think there are some copies outside, which really looking at UK Muslim attitudes towards Islamic finance. But actually, from our research, there are a lot of trends that follow around the Muslim world, which is that actually young people, thinking about 18 to 24s, actually have very little understanding of what Islamic finance even is. They don't have much knowledge, and they share their lack of knowledge with each other, which is... And further, when you look at the broader Muslim communities, actually the level of skepticism about Islamic finance is very high. the level of engagement is much lower than we would expect. Less than half of Muslim communities in the UK have actually ever used Islamic finance, which means that if we expect Islamic finance to have a broader impact outside of the Muslim communities, then actually if we can't even persuade Muslims to buy Islamic finance products or to use them or to advocate for them, then we're in really big trouble about the wider ethical implications of the industry that we have. And within that, there's also some really interesting data around how Muslim women know, learn, engage with Islamic finance. And the simple answer, and this is very broad brush, is that they don't really know very much. They don't seem to talk about it very much, and they don't really engage with it very much either. And again, thinking about that kind of heart that Muslim women have, thinking about finance, for example, Muslim women are anecdotally said to contribute more to charities and to mosques than the wider community. The question would be, why? How do we encourage a shift in perspective around these questions? And really simple things like, why do we have almost no Muslim influencers that talk about finance? If you kind of scroll through your social media feeds, there's loads around fashion and beauty and a bit of comedy here and there, and you're going to get some Islamic dawah stuff, but we don't have people talking about finance and trying to contextualize that within the Islamic ethical framework. Who are these people? Where do we find them? How do we get to talk about those questions? And within this broader community framework, we heard a little bit from my predecessors around people who are investing, whether that's just a very wealthy person or a corporation or an institution or a sovereign wealth fund. But we are finding that, particularly in minority Muslim countries where Muslim families tend to become more settled or a little bit older, where is the thinking around investment? And how do those families invest for the future? What is quite interesting is in the data that we found is that the best users and advocates of Islamic finance were 35 to 44-year-old males. So there's something kind of interesting happening, but we have to think about who are those investors and what are they investing in. We've got to think about the broad consumer base. If we truly believe that Islamic finance products are beneficial for the people who use them, how do we get them to do that? But also, we're starting to see a shift towards a wealthier Muslim trajectory, middle class, upper class Muslims, but actually a very poverty-stricken group of Muslims who might actually be the beneficiaries within the same social societies. So how do we kind of match those people up in the way that we think about the ethics of Islamic finance and the way that structures can be put together to help the investors support those within their own communities?
There is an affluent group in society, especially in the Middle East, that's also supporting these type of networks and initiatives, that's actually well aware of the opportunities and the necessity of getting engaged on these issues, and that actually in trying at least to allocate time and commitment towards the community and the various community activities out there, and that are also quite drawn to the investment opportunities out there. And I don't know if you've heard or seen the interesting studies by Morgan Stanley, Sustainable Signals. The latest report, the third one, has just been issued, and it looks at the broad spectrum of who and why millennial, female, and other mainstream investors are actually looking into the topic. And what's quite interesting is there is an interest in sustainable investment strategies, which also includes impact, that's rising globally. There is clearly an adoption of sustainable investing, which is up and rising, not at the same pace and scale, but nevertheless. And thirdly, there is an increasing demand for product. But there is a disconnect because the product development curve is not there. And we have also a disconnect in the moment. We're seeing a lot of institutional money moving down towards sustainable investing, social impact, and other more responsible investment strategies.
Is this the case though in Islamic finance? In Islamic impact investing?
In Islamic impact investing, no. And also not generally mainstream per se around the world. That's exactly the add-on for all the type of markets on sustainable or impact or Islamic finance investing.
And so what can we do to expand this market of Islamic impact investing?
There isn't enough data as it exists in how Islamic philanthropy is being used in the field. And this is one of the driving factors with which we came up with the One Wash Fund. There is a need for clearly defined and measurable outcomes. B, the concerns of traditional donors, of traditional philanthropists are evolving, including Islamic philanthropists, in terms of where their dollar contribution is actually making an impact. see there is a huge SDG financing gap. The needs are obvious across the world and specifically even for OIC countries. And finally, there is absolutely a need for greater innovation in products as well as ones that can achieve scale. And I think these four are the combination of factors that basically bring about how there can be greater efficiencies in Islamic philanthropy and Islamic investing.
It's interesting from personal experience. We also get approached a lot by just, can you provide us with data in terms of how many women are actually interested in Islamic finance? And it's something that we really do need to sit down and do, because I'm kind of seeing the opposite. I'm kind of feeling that women do care about change. They want to make an impact. They're working in a lot of organisations that they've paid off their mortgages, or they're paying off their mortgage, but it's not really bringing them satisfaction. And they're quite conscious of that now. And I think because this is the area of social media, so everything now is out. Before you could hide things, you can't now anymore.
Right, thank you. Shelina?
I think one of the interesting things, if you look at the attitudes towards specifically Islamic financial institutions, so thinking about your questions about what's happening to actual Islamic finance institutions, is that there appears to be, both about financial institutions and about Muslim-run charities, a kind of discomfort or skepticism about what is happening to the money and whether it's being properly used or dispersed. So if you go back to that scale you were talking about right at the beginning about how competitive is something and which return are you getting, a lot of the consumers that we follow and study are very skeptical. They think Islamic finance is more expensive, or they're not getting the return that they should be getting for it, because perhaps there isn't enough emphasis on understanding other forms of payback or how financial instruments are structured. So people are very skeptical that something Islamic is really Islamic, which is a really difficult paradox to find yourself in. And equally, they also talk about how when they are giving monies to charity, Muslim-run charities, they seem very skeptical if there is a kind of a reduced, less than 100% percentage of what's reaching the beneficiary, which also, from my perspective, seems very strange, because you need to have effective charities that are run well. So there seems to be some kind of problem in the general Muslim discourse about what you get for your money and what happens to your money, and whether anything less than 100%.
So can I just ask, who are the people that were they investors that you were actually interviewing?
See, that's
the problem, because the research that we're seeing from Goldman Sachs, from Fidelity, they're really clear. I mean, Fidelity's last week, I think, they said 73% of millennials they surveyed are willing to pay more for brands that are sustainable. So the conventional reports are really in contradiction to what you're saying, and maybe that's where the problem is, and someone, or you or someone out there, needs to actually interview the investors.
So I think the difference in the studies that you're referring to about millennials in general and Muslims, and we're talking about Muslims relating to Islamic institutions that deal with money. And so there is a lot of skepticism from Muslim consumers about Islamic finance itself and about Muslim-run charities more generally, which is much more anecdotal rather than data-driven. And also, coming from a marketing background, a lot of millennials say they're looking for purpose-driven, but the question is, does that really translate into what they're buying? So, for example, you have an advert like Pepsi's Kendall Jenner advert, and people get very upset. Does that change consumption behaviour?
Just look at, like, for example, the car industry. Electronic cars at the moment are exploding, and it's because of the fact that the millennials are saying that we're quite conscious now that we don't want to drive a car that's going to hurt the environment.